Welcome to the STARTS4Water vlog. My name is Anna Ridler. I'm your anchor woman. In this series, we'll have conversations with artists who are currently working as artists in residence at the STARTS Partner Institutes. I would like to welcome our guests today. Anna Ridler from the UK, who is doing her residency at Luca and Gluon in Brussels, Belgium, and Tim Soens, Professor Climate History at the University of Antwerp. Welcome to you both. And Anne, can you introduce yourself and tell us in short about the project you are developing in your residency in Belgium?
Of course. My name is Anna Ridler. I'm an artist and researcher based in London, and I'm really interested in, I suppose, systems of knowledge and how knowledge is formed and kept. I have worked a lot with technology as part of my practice, both at the front end and the back end, and I like to kind of do everything myself when I'm kind of working with this new kind of material and new ways of working. So I build everything from the data or try and find data. I code up the algorithms, and then I create installations in a variety of different mediums: moving image, computational photography, sound, writing. And for the past 4 or 5 years, I've been working a lot with machine learning or artificial intelligence and nature, or also kind of like natural history. And I'm really interested in kind of when you get the collision of maybe two kind of different systems when they kind of like come on top of each other. So a project that I'm most well known for is a series of work that I did over 3 or 4 years around tulips and tulip mania and cryptocurrencies, which took a variety of different forms. It was a large kind of 50 square meter installation of photographs that I took of tulips to make a data set that I then used to kind of create a moving image piece, where these tulips responded to the price of Bitcoin. And then I made a further kind of functioning DApp, kind of decentralized application where you could buy and sell these tulips on the blockchain, with bots kind of bidding for them as well. And so I'm really interested in kind of that way of working, where you take kind of an object or a small object and then use it to telescope out these different histories and find these moments where there are connections that might not be obvious, and kind of use that to understand kind of what we value, and how kind of we've kind of come to construct these things. And so I'm very interested in kind of, as I said, kind of like finding these connections, these connections that may not be obvious, but are there, that can kind of really reveal how the moment that we're in now, kind of like you can see those echoes in the past, and what can we learn from that. A lot of the work that I do make does kind of almost have a strong documentary edge to it. So it's always grounded in the real world, using real data or a real instance of something. And I'm very interested in kind of like, using that to kind of explore not only kind of like what we can learn from the past, but also what the future might be from kind of like taking these moments from the past. So for the STARTS4Water project, I actually found it quite challenging, because I'm used to working with a single object, but water is obviously not a single object. It has so many different layers. It has, especially when thinking about it through the lens of capitalism, there are so many different ways that it can kind of be explored or expanded on, and there are so many different ways that it touches history in the region. But one of the, and you can think about it on an economic level, you can think about it on a social level, you can think about it on a symbolic level. All of these things kind of like come together. And one of by researching and reading and kind of exploring the region, talking to lots of different experts who were part of the local expert group, I kept on coming back to ideas around finance and trade in the medieval kind of time period. I kept on coming back to kind of ideas around how kind of like that kind of generated wealth, and how that kind of landscape grew and changed. And so that kind of led me to talking to Tim.
So that would be really nice to hear Tim's point of view. Could you briefly introduce yourself, Tim, and tell us how your work connects to Anna's work?
Okay, very nice. I'm Tim Soens. I'm a historian, a climate and environmental historian from the University of Antwerp in Belgium. And I've been looking mainly over the past, 20 years already, on how people dealt with water throughout history. Very much connected also to the question how change in social organization and economic organization, the rise of capitalism itself, has changed the way we dealt with water and how it shapes our current understanding of water and the challenges we face today. I've mainly been investigating the problems people have encountered with water: too much water, too little water, droughts, floods, and how they coped with this. I also investigated how people start to look at water as a commodity, as a resource, how they started to trade water, drinking water, how they started to measure water, calculate it, its quantity, its profits, its potential as a source of income, its potential also as a source of risk and hazards. That's also something you can measure and calculate. And how all of that shaped our current interaction with water and the problems we are facing. That was not, for me, that's not a sort of linear story from the past, to where we are today. No, there have been different ways of dealing with water in the past. There have been different types of understanding water, different types of working with water, different types of living with the variability of water. And at a certain point, you see accelerations in the way societies and people are dealing with water. And these accelerations then, they bring a new type of new configurations between humans and water. And some of these configurations disappear and others stay and are further evolving. And that's the whole legacy we are dealing with today. So that's more or less what I've been doing with. And this whole idea of water capitalism, of course, for me, it's interesting because I think that the rise of capitalism is a very crucial historical phenomenon to understand our current world. It's very interesting to study its distant roots back into the medieval past for me. And on the other hand, I think it's fascinating to think of water as capital, but it's also a bit threatening to do so. But I will come back on that.
Anna, would you like to respond to that? Do you agree with the connection Tim is making with your work, or do you want to add something there?
I think, so when I spoke to Tim, kind of, how long ago was it? It was like a month?
2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Yeah, I don't know what is time anymore. I was kind of very struck by kind of the way that he was able to articulate what I had suspected. So the instance that you gave of kind of the water entrepreneur in Antwerp, I found very interesting because it was one of the first instances that I could find of someone using kind of selling water making it into a commodity, because that's something where I've been doing a lot of research as to how that's happening right now. And as you say, kind of tracing these kind of roots, these, as I like to, you called it, you know, like the distant roots of it in this time period, I think was very nice for me, because it's not something that is just happening right now. It has happened throughout history. And I think kind of like understanding how that works.
I just want to zoom in a little bit on this notion of water capitalism and the relevance of your project and for the Flanders region. How does this historic view relate to today's situation in Flanders when it comes to water capitalism?
So for my project, I'm trying as much as possible to use data from the region that will go into kind of like the models that I'm building and then the way that it's running. So I'm trying to build kind of like different trading systems that kind of like will make its way into an installation. And I'm using kind of the rainfall, I'm using kind of like the historical kind of weather patterns for the region. So it's all kind of being built to kind of reflect kind of what's happening or what has happened in the Flanders region. And I've been trying to kind of find data going way back, just even kind of like back hundreds and hundreds of years to the medieval period. I have not necessarily been the most successful at that, but to try and train a deep learning algorithm on kind of medieval data. But I'm trying to kind of like really kind of take all of the bits that kind of that require kind of information and kind of like using kind of it from the region.
And Tim, what is the relevance of Anna's project for your field of studies and your field of research?
Well, I think to investigate the usefulness of a concept like water capitalism, it's something you can write papers about, and you can develop sort of conceptual framework for that. But people should to investigate whether it has potential. It might be interesting to do like Anna is doing, to turn it into an object of a sort of creativity and artistic creativity by exploring other ways of understanding its potential. So that's and its different meanings it can have. So for me, it's important that there is a narrative being built, and a project like the residency of Anna can help to build a narrative on the idea of water capitalism in this case. Also, I think it's important that it can also be a critical narrative, that you don't necessarily only show why something is a fantastic idea, but also why something has been tested in the past and that there has been important risks and problems involved to this idea. And that's the case, I think, in with the idea of water capitalism, which is something which should be dealt with care, because before you know, you are even more than today commodifying water and sort of reducing it to a commodity with one single use, which goes against what is needed today. And what is needed today, for me, that's a sort of broadening of the value of water, the different services water can provide. And that's not very easy to reconcile that with the idea of capitalism. I don't know, Anna.
No. I agree with everything you said, both in terms of kind of like being critical about the concept and the failures of the past, but also just to kind of like pick up on what you said a bit earlier about why kind of like working kind of or taking your research and why that's kind of like interesting or important. I find that like when I work with people like yourself or the local expert groups, it's just kind of like articulating it in a different way for people. So it's taking kind of concepts that sometimes might be a bit esoteric or might be a bit kind of too academic maybe, or too obscure, or kind of like, and kind of presenting it in a way which allows people to kind of understand and kind of experience the idea of it in a way that they can't necessarily do in an essay or even kind of like a talk. And I think it can like open up some of these ideas to people who wouldn't necessarily consider them. And you can kind of take sometimes quite complex ideas that would take, you know, like thousands of words to write, and kind of create something that people can kind of like very easily understand or very easily get to the heart of it. My first degree was actually in English literature. So I spent my life kind of writing these very long essays before kind of like moving to kind of making, because I found that I was able to kind of like take these kind of things that were previously like so complex and kind of really distill them down into something like an object or a painting or an experience that kind of take all of that and kind of repackage it and kind of like articulate it to people. And so I think that's kind of also one of the things, the joys of kind of working in this way, with working with experts and working with kind of like all this real world stuff, is that you're able to kind of like, build kind of things that allow people to kind of really kind of like engage with it in a different way.
Mm-hmm. And then are you also planning, Anna, to continue using this research, or continue the collaboration with people like Tim in the future?
Well, I hope so. I haven't spoken to Tim about it, but I hope so, because like I think, you know, like the project is both kind of like, you know, we had 6 months to make, which is both a very long time, but it's also a very short time. So most of my projects that I've done, you know, have started off like this, but then have continued for much longer, because every time you kind of make something or you show something, you learn a little bit more about what the thing is, or, you know, you find out what's really interesting, or you then kind of like change it or shift it, or you know, like create, or you kind of like, I always find like it's always like the week before you're due to show something that you're like, actually what I should have done is all this other stuff. So I think it probably will be quite a long running thing for me, and because it is such a complex, dense topic like water capitalism, even kind of narrowing it down to a region, even narrowing it down to kind of looking at kind of like this kind of like aspect of kind of like water as commodity, it still is huge. There's still so much that can kind of like come out.
But I really was kind of triggered by what you mentioned about your earlier work and Tim's notion of the critical narrative. I all of a sudden think I understood it that you might be anticipating on a water mania instead of a tulip mania. Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, I think if you look at kind of like where the world is going, and you look at kind of like how water is being treated, there will be, I think, it's going to be the next kind of area of speculation, I think. But that's just my opinion.
Tim, do you want to react on this notion of the future scenarios for water as a commodity and water mania in terms of accessibility of water in this whole realm of water capitalism?
Yes, absolutely. I have two pictures which might better illustrate than words what I think can be interesting. This is it's a French picture. It's not Belgian, but it can be found all over Europe in the 19th century. It's a lavoir, a washing place. And there is a small, c'est le coin où l'on bavarde. It's the place where people are chatting or talking, where women mostly were chatting. It's why do I show this? Because it's the idea of water as a sort of common. The water common, that's the opposite of water as capital. It's another concept which was very prominent in the past. It's water has certain functions, certain uses for many people. It had different uses. The same water was used in different ways. There were different types of water, which all had functions for the community, and it was all strictly regulated. It was not that people just used the water as they liked. No, it was at a lavoir, a washing place. There were strict regulations on what you can do, on who could access, and how you should not pollute this water too much, and so on. So there are many uses and a strict regulation on what one could do with the water. This is, of course, the other model of what you can do with water. It's a sort of industrial river. This is Belgium, the Vester area, where there have been huge floods this summer at this space. And there you see, instead of multiple uses, instead of the water as a common, we have the water reduced to a single function: transport, a canal for ships, or water for the industrial plant you see on your left side. So it's sort of a reduction, a simplification of water to a few uses, which are then carefully controlled, maintained, but you don't see any. It no longer serves the community as a whole, and it no longer has this multiplicity of uses. So that's, for me, the two different modes of dealing with water. On the one hand, the lavoir idea, the idea of water as a common for a whole range of users. On the other hand, the water which is reduced to a single function, and then its use is optimized for that function, be it water provisioning, be it transport or whatever. So that's important for me to think of. So if there is a water mania, and if there is to come a water mania, and there should come a water mania, I think it's very interesting, then we should carefully reflect on which model we want to choose. So we want the model of the commodified, the single use, the water with the optimized from which we optimize the function in one direction, or do we want a sort of water as common, which serves a whole range of interests for the local, for all stakeholders involved? So that's something we should reflect on. There are.
Yeah, Anna, would you like to react to this?
I agree. I mean, I think it's really interesting to kind of think of these two different models, both of which have their roots in the past, and which way which way kind of like we are heading towards. I mean, I think you can think of them as kind of like the dystopian and utopian options, almost. And I think what am I trying to say? That I'm interested in how you could potentially get to either one of those places now, because they're both kind of like, they both are kind of like complex, and we're not at either of those states, I think. And I think it's interesting to kind of like, yes, explore them and see how they will kind of like evolve. I am finding kind of like through my own research, I've been working, I suppose, more on how water has kind of like more on the latter than the former. And I'm interested in kind of like how historically, or kind of like how it's kind of become more and more kind of like the uses are becoming more and more isolated. So even kind of like before, when kind of like you would have the multiplicity of kind of like water and the water commons, and now how that's kind of shrinking down to kind of like a single use, and how potentially it can open up again.
And what would you, Anna, see as your kind of role as an artist to criticize or to give direction to either one of these models?
I think my role of an artist isn't necessarily to criticize. I mean, it is to criticize, and I think I am critical in my work, but I think it's also to open up and reflect that these possibilities exist and that they can, and I think it's up for the viewer to kind of like decide in a way. I kind of like think of the way that I work as being a way of allowing people to explore these ideas. And I don't necessarily think that in the work itself, there will be that it's my responsibility to kind of like offer a solution to the problem. I think it's very much kind of like to start the conversation and allow people then through to kind of like decide for themselves whether something, which one is the most positive, which one is the most beneficial, which one has the most kind of like to give. But I think kind of like as an artist, the way that I like to work is to kind of like bring out and kind of surface these ideas and kind of like thread them together and kind of show kind of like the potential of each, or kind of like all the negatives of each, and allow people to make their own minds up.
I would like to ask both of you a short takeaway for our audience, students, educators, and so on. So, Tim, would you like to start with the takeaway for our audience?
Perhaps you might hear that it's raining outside, and we are in Flanders, Belgium, and not so long ago, people thought of Belgium as a very rainy country, but today it's a very dry country, and we are one of the driest spots in the whole of Europe, which is quite, and that has to do with the way we have we are dealing with our waterscape and our relation with water. So what Anna is doing, thinking on this notion of water capitalism, is highly needed. We need to reevaluate how we deal with water. And I think the past experiences of what we did wrong and which different scenarios there had been possible might be very inspiring. So I look forward to the result of this artistic work.
Thank you. And Anna, what's your takeaway for our audience?
I would say that the takeaway for me would be how this idea of water capitalism is so interrelated with other kind of like larger concepts that we kind of take for granted, things like time, things like climate. All of these things kind of come together into this concept. And I think for me, it's really important to kind of see the past and to understand the past and understand kind of the work that Tim is doing in order to kind of come up with a solution for the future, and to see the mistakes that have been made, or the choices that have been made, and to understand how we've got to where we are, I think is so essential in order to kind of like think of a solution for the future.
Wow. Thank you so much, both of you, for this very condensed and inspiring conversation. And thank you, our audience, for watching the STARTS4Water vlog. Please stay tuned for more editions. Thank you.